Hey, this is Jeffrey Brown, Market for Yourself podcast, and today's guest is Edward. Edward, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Edward. I am based out of New York City. I have been an entertainer and writer and content creator for the majority of my entire life. Currently, I am wearing the hat of author as I just wrote my own book about being a cancer survivor. And other than that, I like to sing and I have songwriting capabilities and I do all kinds of other things for fun.
So, Edward, tell me, we had a conversation the other day, but how did you get started in this? Like, end up being this kind of personality, and you doing all these different things. I know that you coach and do all this other stuff that you're doing. How did you get started? Where the journey began?
I mean, I grew up in a creative family. My dad's a singer-songwriter, recording artist guy. My mom played piano. We were always involved in theater, so that was kind of the catalyst for the holy hot mess of my life as an entertainer. But I was very fortunate. I grew up in a space where the arts and creativity were encouraged and praised, and you know, like my grandmother sent my sister to like art school over a summer one year, and we were very fortunate to be able to do stuff like that and be able to move in an arts and entertainment space our whole lives. Like I grew up in recording studios with my dad, and gigging out with him and just watching him perform live. And I thought that that was normal,
Right.
like not on a huge grand like stadium scale, but, watching like as a 5-year-old kid, watching a room full of people clap for your dad is kind of like, I don't even really have a word for it. It's just kind of like, it's wow, so that was the beginning of that. Um, you know, Moving to New York to do that and be an entertainer and work in theater and everything else, it was just a choice that I wanted to do. I didn't feel like I had another option. I bought into the whole like being cool thing in high school and let my straight A's fall down and I barely graduated. But you know, somehow I'm still alive and paying for
Tell,
things.
tell me, what made you want to write a book?
I once I had cancer, I always wrote. I wrote as a kid. I read like a vacuum cleaner when I was a kid. And as an adult, I kind of stopped. And I felt like it was just like this weird creative constipation that I had that I needed to like get something out on paper. But specifically for this book, I had met someone who had cancer shortly after I did. He found out he was cancer free like 4 months before I met him. And at that point, I was about 3, 4 years out. And he just articulated to me a bunch of things that he was having a hard time with that were very basic, from conversation with friends to getting up in the morning to navigate what they wanted to do with their life. And it was like, oh, that wasn't just me. I'm not crazy. And I was really actually feeling those things. And so I immediately called a couple other people that I knew who had experienced cancer who were around my age, and kind of just asked them the same questions, like, is this the thing? Do you feel this way? Like what was life like for you after cancer? And once I had conducted my little mini case study, if that's what we want to call it,
Right.
I immediately started writing. I was like, this is going to be what I need to get out, what I want to contribute in line with what I do. And so this book kind of became this narrative about becoming a patient and then what life is like when you're told you're cancer free, which is not like, confetti and champagne. It's like, I don't have anything anymore. I'm starting from zero. And depending on how old you are when that happens, it's harder, like if you have cancer as a kid, like, okay, like you're however old and you haven't experienced a whole lot of life. If you're like 40 or 50, like much harder. You have an entire life behind you and you're starting over. I was smack dab in the middle of that at 25, and I had a lot of things going for me, and I had a lot of promise that I was projecting to have in the next couple of years, and cancer completely derailed all of that. And so I wanted to somehow illustrate that in a fun way. uh like what happens when you get that call that your cancer's gone and you're allowed to live again.
So who's this book for? Like, who did you write it for?
I wrote it for, I that's such a good question. And I feel like I've been asked that before. I don't know. I think in a way I wrote it for myself. I wrote it for the friends I had talked to. And I kind of wrote it as like a flair to be like, hey, this is a thing that happens that I haven't been told anything about, that I didn't know anything about. And so maybe in some kind of way, I had written it for, medical providers as well to signal, like, put some resources together that are not sad sack support groups that help people transition back into some kind of life after they're done, even if it's just like a consultant telling you, like, well, consultant is probably the wrong word, but someone telling you like this is how you're going to feel and it's okay, and like, do you need guidance or help or someone to talk to about how to move forward in your life. And I tried therapy did not work. Like, it worked to a point and then it just became, me saying, I feel this way about this circumstance. And then the therapist articulating back to me, well, how does that make you feel? And it's like, well, I just told you. And that's why I'm here, because I don't know why I feel that way. So can you please help? And it
Right.
got to the point
So
where it was like, what am I paying for?
so it's sort of the person that has gone through this journey of having cancer, and now they're in remission, or it's like, okay, so what do I do now? Or
Yeah.
how do I regain a life that I want at this point?
Yeah, and I think in the book at some point I refer to people who are cancer adjacent, patient adjacent, I believe is the phrase that I use, because it's for them too, realizing that the person that they're with, like, they just were told they were cancer free, and like that is something to celebrate, but like the hard work is just starting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I have some family members that have had or had cancer and prostate.
Yeah.
So that's something that I don't like to even think about it, but because I know I need to probably take a look and have some other stuff looked at, and I
I know, and no one wants to
nobody
do
wants to
that.
do
No
that,
one wants.
man.
And prostate aside, like, no one wants to go to a doctor, no one wants to go to a hospital, and then you add the additional layer that the medical industry in this country is absolutely abysmal on top of that, and like, why would I go get checked for something that maybe I don't have and then have to pay X amount of dollars for it? And that just exacerbates the situation later. That's how stage 4 cancer happens, because we put it off and we don't do it, and it's the medical industry's fault.
Yeah, I guess you had to, so you can shed more light. I have never had it, so I know you've been there, and done that, and I think a lot of people will be really, really like the book that you wrote is like it's going to help them because I know that it might be stuck. Like, man, what the hell am I going to do now?
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make it as entertaining as possible. I've kind of in my brain like rebranded the genre of the book as being like a fantasy nonfiction dark humor musical theater fantasy, or fever dream about being a cancer survivor. So it is very heightened and very Rob Ashford. He was the director of the Chicago musical movie with Catherine Zeta-Jones. It's very that, but it still tells the same story as, if you were reading any other book. And I'm making it as light as possible so that the whoever is reading it, whether it be the patient or their partner or their parent or their healthcare provider, will have a better understanding of the kind of transitions that happen that maybe aren't talked about in a hospital room or otherwise.
how do people get the book?
It is on Barnes and Noble, and I will lead with that because I'm so proud of that fact. um, it is not in store, it is online, but I still will pat myself on the back for that one. But it's at like 30 different retailers, so that you can go online and buy it that way. And there is an audiobook coming. Audiobooks are much harder to do than I anticipated. There's something about reading a book into a microphone that just makes you completely forget how to read.
Right, right. So, what's the name of it again?
It's called Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses.
Cool, cool. So it's like I've never written a book before. I've been contemplating doing that.
You
Uh,
should. What would you write it about?
Well, I think it's just about being an entrepreneur and what it really takes to do that, because I think there's a lot of talk about, yeah, go start your own business and do all this stuff, but there's a lot of mental uh, exercises that you're going to have to go through, because you're going to tell yourself a lot of times that what you can't do and how you're going to get there, and do I have enough money, or I don't have enough time, I don't know enough. You're going to go through all of those conversations in your head that are really not true. You're just saying it in your head, but
Yeah.
they're really not true. So, I mean, I think that that's part of the process. And then the other part of the process is just like understanding how do you could take somebody who you don't know, bring them into your system, who you become to know, and then they become buyers. That's a completely separate process from the mental process.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's a lot um, to kind of take in. It really is, for somebody to say, "I want to start a business." I think it's much harder than just going and get a job.
Oh my god, exponentially more harder.
Right. But the freedom and the ability that you create for yourself as an entrepreneur is just extraordinary. I mean, the life that you can be 10 times of what the life that you have working for somebody.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and so I think that that's a part. I think most books are written to sensationalize being an entrepreneur. But I think that there should be some books that are written about really what the process.
To not sensationalize it.
Right, yeah, about what the process really gonna be about.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I mean, and you work in coaching world, I work in coaching world, and I'm new to it. I only really got into coaching land maybe 9 months ago. And the one thing that I love about it is that it is breaking every single system that we have put in place that does not serve the general populace. It's breaking the education system. Why would I go to college for marketing and spend $100,000 for a 4-year degree where I can't go implement any of it until I'm done, being taught by someone who hasn't worked in the field maybe ever or for a good amount of time, when I could go spend $10,000 on a course that's just going to teach me that, and I get to stop and go implement as I go? Why would you, like, that's a no-brainer,
that's a
you
no-brainer,
know?
yeah.
And it's also breaking up the economic system that we live under as well. Like, if I don't have to punch in and do 9 to 5, why the fuck would I do that? If I can figure out how to make something of my own, and like, that is also a no-brainer.
Right, and I think that people think that they have to have some special knowledge or some special abilities to do it. But in fact, everything that we're creating is just it's already been created. It's just
Yeah,
been a different time in a different space.
yeah.
So the things that we're saying on social media were said in books 50, 100 years ago. It's not really different. And we just call it something different, but it's really not any different. And
Right.
so
Well,
when people
and
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna say, like, to kind of like turn that back around to like writing books and stuff. Like, every fucking buddy and their mother has written a book about cancer, right?
Right.
But the one thing that you have that is valuable, that this also ties into what we were just talking about, is that your story is not going to be like someone else's. So
Right.
if you wanted to write a book about cancer and you saw mine and were like, oh well, someone already wrote about that, it's not going to be the same. Like,
Right.
it's just not. And so, like, starting your own business, like, yeah, maybe you want to start a bicycle company. Well, there's 100,000 fucking bicycle companies,
Bicycles, right, right.
but it's not going to be the same unless you intentionally copy, cut, and paste what that person is doing, and then you're just uninteresting. So,
Right.
like, that's one thing that I often talk about on my own social media, in my work sphere, and in my book. Being yourself and being not full of shit is the most attractive thing in the entire world. I look at people like Lizzo. She doesn't give a good goddamn about what anyone says about her. And people love her for that. Why? Because it's really hard to do. It is really, really, really hard to be able to function and maneuver in your own body, in your own brain, without taking into consideration the thoughts and opinions of other people, especially on social media, because it's flying at you 24 hours a day. And you can't help but see the comment section, which isn't always the best. So I use Lizzo as an example because she's such a perfect example. Like, who would have ever thought that she would be famous on paper? No one. But it's because she doesn't give a shit and she just does it that makes her interesting. So, like, for you, if you wanted to write a book, yeah, there's billions of business books, but
Yeah.
how you tell it and the context that you would put it in is not like anything that anyone else would do unless you are copying and pasting it.
Right. And here's the deal that over my 7-year stint of being involved, um, you learn things from different people, but then there's another spin to it because the way you think about it and the way you process it might be a little different from what they said. In other words, you say, okay, but if I did this, it can make it more beneficial to the person who's getting it. So there's a lot of little things like when we're talking about your niche or your ideal client. Well, one of the things that I developed in my thing is like the beliefs or the vision and your core beliefs. Do they match? And so there's an exercise that I go through to actually see where that is before you do anything in your business. Because if your vision and your beliefs do not match, how can you hit the target?
Yeah.
You can't.
That's one thing we covered also. Nicole Sherry is the woman I work for, and like the one thing that we really go over is what is your result? And it's
Right.
not it's not necessarily the result of your program, although that should be aligned as well. But like, what have you done that you can sell? Because if I'm going to sit here and be like, "Oh, I'm going to teach you how to make $1 million," but I have not made $1 million, you should absolutely not give me money to show you how to make $1 million.
Right. Right. Right.
So it's what you're saying for sure. It is also then being able to say, I have done this and I can show you how to do it, and here are the receipts.
Right. Now, what about that person that has been working in corporate America for many, many years? And that's their go-to person for whatever productivity or standard operating procedures or whatever it may be. But now they say, I want to take this and go on my own. They have never done it before. I mean, like made $1 million or whatever that number is, but
No,
they're
but they still have a result. Whether they have not personally made $1 million, they have effectively worked for a multi-million-dollar company and helped them scale doing that. So really what it
right,
comes down to in that regard is messaging.
right. Yeah,
How are you going to articulate what you're offering based on your experience and your result to the exact person that you want to work with, that they will understand what you do to get them to where they want to go?
right. And that's what they need you guys for.
That's what we're here for.
To
But I
help.
don't want to I don't want to get too deep into that because I would rather have her speak for herself than me speak for her.
Yeah, man. But I think the cancer book is what we'll really hear about. And we know that you do other things, and um, it's really important that people can. The hardest thing in the world is like when you're going through something, you think you're the only one.
Yeah, and that again was kind of the impetus for writing the book because I felt like I was nuts. I felt guilty that I didn't feel like elated that I was cancer free. Like sure, it was a relief that I didn't have this thing growing in me anymore, but like I wasn't over the moon ecstatic that like I had my life back because I didn't have my life back. There was nothing back about it. Like I had to completely start over and figure out what and who I was now and how to move forward with that. And there was a lot of guilt and a lot of shame around it, and the only person I could really talk to was my mom,
Right,
who does work in medicine, but she's not a therapist. So like there's only so much that she could offer, and that's no fault of her own. But kind of looking at that and seeing, looking back and seeing like how much guilt and how much shame I had around not being like, oh my god, I beat cancer, I'm amazing, blah, blah, blah. And that's like the shit that you see out there being put on people who have, like, I was just talking about this yesterday, where you have people that hear you're a cancer survivor and they're like, oh my god, congratulations, good for you. And it's like, I didn't do anything. And like, this is such an unpopular opinion, but I will stand by it. I did nothing to beat cancer. In fact, like if you read this book and listen to any other interview that I've done, like I drank my way through chemo. I fucked my way through chemo. I went to the beach and swam in the ocean. I had every bacterial complication you could possibly imagine, down to a parasite. I did everything I could to not beat cancer.
Right.
It was the medical professionals and the teams of doctors and the decades of science and the fact that I had a team of people who were just the loveliest, shout out to Sloan Kettering, to get me to like put my feet on the ground and show up to my appointments and do all the things. They are the ones that beat my cancer.
Right.
I was just like the vessel in which they moved, and I did everything in my power to make them fail. And yet here I am. So like it's such an unpopular opinion to say that. And like yes, there were components of me being resilient and making sure that I like showed up for myself. So yes, there is that component. I'm not saying I just laid down and let them poke me with needles, although that happened quite often. Um, but this idea that like it's more of a mental game, I guess.
Absolutely.
You know, like when you say like I fought cancer, like I no, I ate and slept and showed up at the hospital and they pumped me full of drugs and I felt like shit and I went home and I slept some more and I drank some water, but I created a company while I was in chemo because I needed a distraction and I needed something to do. And I was so unhappy and so scared at all times that I basically just shut down and was like projecting on everyone else.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, to a point, I don't want to say like, oh, I didn't do anything to beat cancer, but I think by me taking full credit for it, it's negating the accomplishments of the medical team that actually saved my life instead of me taking all the credit when I did everything in my power to not beat cancer.
Right. So, Ed, is there something in this podcast that you wished I've asked you that I haven't asked?
I don't know. I mean, that depends on what you want to know.
No, this is your opportunity. It's not. I don't have. I'm just here as a moderator. I'm not doing, like you said, I'm not doing anything to get rid of cancer.
You'll never get rid of
Moderate.
me.
Yeah.
I am half Italian. I will talk and talk and talk and talk. You're gonna have to shut me up at some
Right.
point.
So there's something that you want to share that you haven't really shared yet, or that you want to say that you just came up all of a sudden. Just you just like, oh, I want to say this.
Um, oh man. I guess like going back to the reason why I wrote this book. Because again, like and this is totally my fault. Like people ask me this and I have no idea how to answer it. And so like not to revisit my answer because I don't think it's wrong, but I do want to encourage anyone who might read this book, please go read this book. Um that like the person that is going through cancer is still a human. And I think there is this thing that happens in our brain where we hear that someone is a cancer patient and we recategorize them into something else. And it's not human, but it's not the person that it was that they were prior. And I say this from the perspective of someone who's lived this experience. Um, the way and seeing the way that friends treated me and seeing the way that doctors and my family treated me during that period of time. It wasn't bad by any stretch. It's just different. And I think that there is a widespread lack of understanding or negating of the experience where you still need and want certain things.
Mhm.
You know, I was in a relationship when this whole thing started. That ended in the middle of it. And that hurt a lot. And that's a much longer conversation to get into for another time. I have put that to bed. It's fine. But like I still had like dreams. I still wanted to do things with my life and I still wanted to go on vacations and own an apartment and you know, a number of other things and I wasn't sure if I was going to get to have any of those things. And so being kind of shuffled along as a patient, it was fine. It was what it was because I knew that it was necessary for me to live. But having those components of your life staring you in the face and having to ignore them and not have anyone else acknowledge them was the worst part, one of the worst parts of the whole thing. And so anyone who's maybe not a patient, maybe this statement isn't for someone who's a patient, but someone who's in that person's orbit, to just know that there is a lot more going on than just the cancer. And I will put a fine point on this by saying that within the Broadway community here in New York, there was recently a death of someone that I heard through the grapevine that on their deathbed, as this person was dying, they were in their 30s, early 30s. They had a conversation about legacy and what were they leaving behind. And for me personally, I don't know if I hold that kind of thing important. I don't know if I put value into that. You know, I'm the only man in my family and none of us are having kids. So there
Right.
goes that legacy. But I think that there's like I bring this up. I bring up the legacy component and this person's end of life because whether that person would have died or not, they did, but if they hadn't, that thought of what am I doing and what have I left behind and what good have I been is something that is again staring that person in the face on a regular basis every day. Every time they get a new injection or a new drug or a new scan or blood work done, like that question of what have I done that's worth anything in this life comes up. And for some people, like being a good brother or a good parent or a good partner is not good enough.
Right.
And it's really hard to face that. It took me a long time to kind of like navigate that game of Tetris.
Right. And
To
that's a
just
hell of a question. I think it's a never ending question. I think that um, you're always creating, and
yeah,
as you get older and older, you're still creating. And I think you start to think about the end, if that is coming upon you for either cancer or not. Um, you start to think about, what have I been and what has been my contribution, and you think about, you know, the value or the purpose of which I lived. And so, yeah, I think that goes for everybody.
yeah. I would love to give you in the spirit of cancer musical theater and other chronic illnesses, the musical theater component. There is a song, I just pulled up the lyrics so that I don't get them wrong. But it's by this songwriting team, Aronson Flaherty, uh highly decorated duo in Broadway world, and it's from a not so well known show called The Glorious Ones, which is about this circus troupe that goes around. And I believe it's Mark Kudish, maybe Mark Kudish, who sings the song called I Was Here. And one of the lines, where is it? Hang on a second. Well, first of all, the first line of it says, "Why does a boy carve his name on a tree, or the firstborn inherit the throne? What is a sculptor aspiring to be when he spends half his life carving stone?" And then basically, towards the end, um, it says, "How can I leave something immortal, something that time cannot make disappear, something to say I was here?" And I remember the first time I heard this and I was like, "Oh no, I'm going to cry now." And it's just such a great piece about legacy and what we want innately as humans to just say, "I was here and I matter and what I've done on the day to day is important." So I would encourage everyone to look that song up because first of all, it's gorgeous and the man's voice is impeccable and the songwriting team is brilliant. But it also speaks very purposefully and directly to what I'm talking about now.
Cool. Well, I enjoyed you coming on, man. I think that you're the first person that I've talked to about surviving cancer and being in business and the mindset that you have to make it through that. Because when you were talking about I haven't done anything, but the one thing that you did do was you managed to control your mind and stay in a healthy mindset to get through it because you had to get through it. I mean, so mentally you had to do enough to get through that. So yeah, I think you did do something. You just haven't acknowledged it. But you,
I did a lot of bourbon
yes, you did
is
a
what
lot of
I
stuff,
did.
right? Even if that was the case, even if that was the case, but I really enjoy that, man, because like I said, I have someone in my family that has cancer, um, and they've just gone through operations and removing it and all that other stuff. So
Yeah.
uh, I know,
Don't be afraid to talk to them about it. I
right,
think a lot of people tiptoe around cancer patients because they're afraid to have a conversation about anything.
right,
And it's exactly what I was talking about, how they're treated differently because there's a fear now because like I think there's a subconscious recognition that that person is facing their mortality as you are facing their mortality.
right,
And it's difficult to have that conversation, but I mean, I guess maybe that's my closing thought is to talk to them.
absolutely. I enjoyed it. I want you to. I want to acknowledge that it's not. Everybody doesn't really want to talk about that, and for you to write about it, I got to commend you on doing that. And I appreciate you coming on Market for Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Appreciate it.
All right, until next time, this is Jeffrey Brown from Market for Yourself podcast. See you soon.